Hi, welcome everyone to a new episode of Pop Cult X. As always, we are joined with your hosts, Gabriel and Danny. As you can see by your screen, if you're watching us on YouTube, we have a very special guest this week, Ed Luce. We're going to be doing a little bit more introduction into his career and his work, but we want to start, as always, with a little bit of pop culture news and what we've been up to. So we're going to let our guest start us off this week. And I'm going to put the question out there. What have you seen television-wise, movie-wise, that has been interesting in the last week? Go ahead and get us started, Ed.
Well, at the time of this recording, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's great to have the chance to chat with you both. But at the time of this recording, House of the Dragon premiered last night on HBO. And unpopular opinion, I didn't hate the end of Game of Thrones as much as most people did, I think.
Okay.
I understand how these things work. They didn't have a book that they were working on for a long time, or working from, I should say, anymore. The way that the internet works, all of the theories that were going out there, they had painted themselves into an obvious corner. I am a pro wrestling fan, so I love a heel turn. I love a dramatic heel turn.
Okay.
So when Danny, spoilers, it's been years since that show ended. Had her big heel turn. I was like, okay, this is interesting. How tragic, how dramatic. Didn't hate it exactly. I think the thing that really upset most people, well, a lot of the little character arcs didn't make people happy. The way that they ended, especially Brienne, I get it. I was disappointed with that too. But Bran, seemed like a logical choice in some ways. So hearing that they were going to do this prequel series completely detached for the most part. I mean, if you've seen the first episode, you know that there's, a lot of little Easter eggs and one big sort of, foretelling of the future that we all knew about at the very end. At the first, I was like, this feels a little off. It looks a little cheap in some spots. Sorry. I mean, it's their biggest show and their biggest franchise. So
their biggest budget, right?
Yeah, I was like, come on. Like, I think we could do a little bit better. But what I was looking for was some iconic moments, like the first episode of the very first season of Game of Thrones. And we got them. I mean, in my opinion, I don't know. Are we doing spoilers or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go for it.
Yeah.
I mean, the birth scene was pretty major. I mean, they kind of toned it down a little bit, and I understood maybe why, given sort of what's going on politically in the country right now. But they went there with that. The Matt Smith's character. I'm gonna just skim over the names. I'm a big fan of Game of Thrones, the recap show on YouTube that Jonathan Van Ness used to do, and I love how he had alternate names, or they had alternate names for characters. So I'm just going to use the actor names because I have not committed those to memory yet. But Matt Smith seems like a suitable villain.
Matt Smith is great.
Yeah, I'm
him as an actor.
To just the whole vibe, the sort of passing down of the what is it, the inheritance, I forget what it's called. The whole episode is based on, I can't remember the name of the specific word, but passing down the throne to the daughter. I love that whole scene. So the dragons look good, for the most part. I'm excited for it.
Nice.
Very cool. Now, Gabe, have you ever watched Game of Thrones? Because we've never talked about it here. Have you ever seen a Game of Thrones episode? Because I'll tell you right now, I've never seen one. I guess it's the new vegan, right? Being a snob, but I've never seen a Game of Thrones show, And unfortunately, I haven't, because I didn't have HBO Max at the time when it was out and running. So, but now I do have access to it. Maybe I should go back and watch it, or maybe start in House of Dragons, because I have seen the intrigue of it. I think 10 million people watched the first episode, is what I heard. So must be worthwhile.
So full disclosure on my end, even though I am a textbook nerd and geek, I'm not a really big fantasy fan. And the reason why, and this is kind of a running joke with like people I know, my friends, is that whenever I see fantasy or science fiction, I rarely see people that look like me in it. And so I can't really get drawn into the tales and the adventure of it, because I don't know. It's a thing. Like, and what I think that right now, what's happening with this new series is that some of the criticism is of it being not accurate by having a lot of people of color in it. So that's actually made me excited to go in and to watch it, because I am glad that maybe they went back and said, let's fix some of the errors in our casting, possibly, that we've created this fantasy realm and it should be inclusive of all different types of people. So that actually excites me about it. So I might actually go in and watch it now. I saw a really great tweet by a woman, and was saying that, I forget if it was Lord of the Rings or this, but they were saying that it has a misogynistic tone to it. And she was like, that fans are saying, well, we want to be true to the era. And she's like, what the fuck are you talking about era? It's fantasy. It's like everything is made up. I think it was Lord of the Rings. And so I'm very much like in that camp of let's kind of fix some of the misogynistic, homophobic, all white people aspect of fantasy and science fiction, and then I'll kind of join in as a fan. That's kind of where I am. So I've never watched it because of that. I've never really been interested in that, but I have seen a lot of people of color start to create worlds in which are representative of a lot of different various background. And that excites me, because I think that it is like a big hole that is missing within that genre. So that's where I fall on it.
Fair enough.
And here I thought I had like a hot debate question.
I know. I feel bad because you're so excited to bring it up, and I'm like, well, it'll be good for our fans to like be able to hear that, because me and Danny hardly ever talk about Game of Thrones. And so I did want to hear your opinion of it. So it sounds like it's great, right? It sounds like it's a really good review from you. So I will now go and watch it and see if maybe it wins me as a fan.
Yeah, it might be a good thing for both of you to start fresh on before you tackle the sort of unwieldy amount of episodes that there are with Game of Thrones, the original series. I mean, I would say it's indicative of sort of the sex and the violence that you'll see in the main series too, which, I mean, again, the thing that I was astounded by when I first started watching the original series as a horror movie fan, it's almost the only thing that I watch outside of, whatever you want to call it, prestige television. I don't know what we're calling it nowadays. It's all horror. I love horror. And the average episode of Game of Thrones has more gore in it than any of the Friday the 13th like ever did. I would say any of the Nightmare on Elm Streets. I would say the average Game of Thrones episode has 2 Friday the 13th worth of gore in it.
Wow.
So yeah. And the sex, especially the later Friday the 13th, the MPA got involved and started really cutting those all the scenes out once they realized kids love the movie.
So before we get any further, I think we should properly introduce you to people who are watching and are listening. That's a
good idea.
And so I'll start with how I became a fan of Ed and your work. I think like a lot of people, the character of Wuvable Oaf, like the actual image, drew me into the comics, and I'm going to actually ask you about that, about branding a little bit later. But I was attracted to, the big guy dude character and like the little underwear with the pink cat. And then I started reading it, and it, found the humor and kind of slice of life that I found in it that I thought really to be interesting. And then I've actually met Ed at a couple different, I think Comic-Con twice now and WonderCon. And was fortunate enough to get, autograph, talk a bit about, what your work is like. But to give the full overview, you are a fine artist, a comic book creator, independent artist. You've done work with Image for Marvel, for all types of, independent, huge comic book, publications. Created your own character that is like now becoming, an icon within indie publishing and within, queer culture, heavy metal, wrestling. I think you're now becoming also famous with your branding, with branching out into, some wrestling partnerships. You did a T-shirt for Pero. You've done some work with heavy metal artists with having them record music as your Wuvable Oaf's band, and so kind of all over the place. And so that you're also a professor. I should mention you're also a teacher and teach within your industry and are helping the new generation of creators, I think, coming up. So if I could, Ed, could you just kind of start and give us like your origin story, how you got started in the comic book industry?
Sure. Yeah. I always say that I am a refugee of the fine arts world to a certain degree. I went to undergrad for illustration. Towards the end of that, I decided I don't want to draw other people's ideas. Like if I'm not into it, I can't do it. You can tell in the quality of the work. So I decided in my senior year that I wanted to do a bunch of paintings. Sort of, I would say, my own kind of processing of my religious upbringing. So I did religious icons that were, sort of sideshow creatures, and the Virgin Mary with like an anatomical heart, with her chest ripped open and showing that. I mean, I kind of got really into that, and I used that portfolio to actually get into grad school at UC San Diego, where they did not have an illustration program. So I got wedged into the painting department, and also, I ended up getting my degree in performance and installation, if you could believe that. So I think a lot of this kind of prepped me for ultimately what I would do with my comics work, where the project always starts on the printed page, but it's never relegated to just that space. It can become music, as you mentioned, or it can become cosplay, it can become costumes, it can become toys. I've had a really great collaboration and partnership with the sculptor Eric Erspamer out of Phoenix, Arizona. He has made my goat blood costume that often you'll see. In fact, I wasn't sure if you were there to see at Comic-Con this past year, but I had Joe P. Harris, the actor, dressed up as the goat blood character, wearing a costume that Eric had made. So that grad school upbringing really kind of taught me to realize my ideas in a bunch of different forms. It doesn't have to be just two-dimensional. So I kind of fumbled around for years in a fine arts career. I was a gallery artist. I had a museum show for a little while. I lived in New York City. And then when I moved back to California, I kind of found myself in San Francisco in a tiny apartment where I could no longer make these giant paintings. So San Francisco having a really vibrant comic scene still to this day, a lot of sort of, I would say, anchor shops. The one in particular that is just a half a block away from me is Isotope Comics Lounge.
Nice.
They have been a huge supporter of my work, and certainly a measure of my success has been due to James and Kirsten, the sort of co-facilitators of Isotope. So I came here and met a bunch of people. I went to the Alternative Press Expo. Was lucky enough to find the Prism Comics booth. Prism being the LGBTQ plus organization at a lot of events. They had their own show for the first time called QCon this past June in West Hollywood. So I was lucky to be a part of that. But I saw that booth and I saw the work that was being made there, and I got really excited. But I didn't quite see the book that I wanted to read that really captured my experience. And certainly there were comics, gay comics that were being made about bears in particular. We'll call it what it is. I call it oafs. That's kind of my euphemism for it.
Yeah.
But I didn't quite see that book, and my experience that thus far in San Francisco at that point didn't sort of see that represented. So I decided, what better way to manifest something that you wanted to see in the world than to kind of make my own. And it just kind of started from there.
Oh, nice.
Right.
I love the term bear because I think, well, first, to disclosure, Danny is straight. I'm his longtime friend of mine, is his wife, Christina. We worked together. That's how I actually got to meet Dan. And one of my favorite stories is we went as a group to San Francisco. It was just after a trip to Big Bear, California. And so Danny had purchased a beanie that said Big Bear on it. And it just happened to be during annual bear jamboree, whatever, in San Francisco. So as we're walking through, bear after bear is like eyeing him down and like just, trying to flirt with him. Daddy's like, what's going on? So we finally get like a paper, and it's like International Bear Jamboree this week in San Francisco. And he's like, wait, what's a bear? And he's like, oh dear. And it was just like the when he realized what it was and why people were responding, and like he basically had an advertising on there that be, Big Bear. It was the funniest thing ever. And so I'm curious, how many people are brought to your booth or to your product, to your comic book, that are like, let's say, metalheads and don't know what a bear is and think, oh, this is a cool comic book about this big burly wrestler dude, metal, and then find out about it and are still cool. I mean, I think I kind of know the answer, but are still cool with it being a little bit, about relationships or gay life. And how many, have you ever had an experience where they're like, oh, that caught me totally off guard. Like, I'm not into this.
Yeah. Well, I would say that definitely I was excited and a little surprised to find a crossover audience for sure. Yeah. And I can kind of pinpoint, I think, the moment it happened. I did a show in Portland, Oregon called Stumptown. And, Portland being very much the progressive city that it is, even at that time, I think it was like 2010. I noticed I was getting a lot of what I perceive to be, not to generalize or stereotype, straight dudes, beardy, Pabst Blue Ribbon drinking, guys, Pacific Northwest guys coming over to my booth that were just kind of attracted to the image that you described earlier. This sort of, big, kind of ugly, hairy dude, scary eyes, scary pink teeth. In these little tiny underwear with a cat on the face. So they kind of got it. They got that it was celebrating that body type. It wasn't the usual sort of pop cultural trope of making that character out to be a sidekick or comic relief or whatever. And it's not that there isn't humor in the book. I mean, that is the heart of the book, but the character of the oaf was the sort of centerpiece of that. And they got that it was a reverent and an affectionate portrayal. So I think I always say oaf is a type. It's not necessarily bound by gender. It's not bound by age or race or anything. It can be, everybody has an oaf in their life, essentially, whether it's their partner, their brother, their husband, their father. So I think that was an immediate connection that a lot of these, let's call them straight guys made, that they got into it, so then they would pick up the book and they would find the music elements and the cat elements. I think the cats being sort of a secondary cast unto themselves are another thing that people really connect to. So I will say too that I kind of purposefully constructed the book to be open for a broader audience. I didn't use particular words. There were certainly some images that I considered to be deal breakers that at the time you might see in other comics, like erotic comics, but I didn't want to necessarily put that in there because I just wanted to see who would come to the playground, so to speak. And it's funny. I think in the collection that Fantagraphics ultimately released, there's like 2 penises in it. And yet you can still go to Goodreads and read a review where some person put a comment and it's the hot dog gif or the hot dogs. There's only 2 penises in it. I don't get it. So I don't have to work hard at all to offend people, but I have to work real hard to get like the gay audience that's into kind of erotic comics embrace it in the same way. So I never had any moments where people got upset or offended. I think if you just pick up a book and open it, it's pretty obvious what's going on. And if it's not for you, you can put it down and politely leave. I've definitely done some shows in more conservative places, and I've never had a problem. So I guess I feel sort of blessed. I'm just going out and doing shows now in the sort of post era that we find ourselves in from the former guy, and have occasionally just been like, okay, is this still okay? I did a G.I. Joe cover once that got me in all kinds of trouble. So I've been kind of a little knives out for that when I've been going out recently. Since March, I think I've done like 6 shows. So but yeah, never any real incidents that made me feel unsafe, let's say.
That's good.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned the G.I. Joe cover, because I was going to just mention that. It's one of my favorite variant covers ever, not only that you've done, but just in general. I'm a big fan of G.I. Joe. This is obviously a Gen X pop podcast. So we're big fans of all the throwbacks, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, He-Man, etc. So when I saw that you were doing that, I was like, oh, I had to rush out and go get it. The cover itself seemed to me like your version of G.I. Joe, battle scene, nothing nothing in your face that I thought, oh, this is going to be controversial or this is going to, make people grab their clutch their pearls or anything. But yet you still did have a conservative faction that was like, oh, this is too gay. And when you look at it, you're like, what? It's the exact same thing you look at when it's regular G.I. Joe. And to kind of tell our audience, you have wrestling in your comics, you have heavy metal. The imagery of those things are also very homoerotic. You have guys wrestling with each other in little Speedos. You have outright now guys that are, part of their shtick is like grabbing people's junk or kissing. You have heavy metal, the first thing that comes to my mind is Judas Priest and Rob Halford with the Leatherman outfit that teenage boys for years accepted, but then all of a sudden, if you put it under the guise of a gay guy, it's like, oh, that's sick. He's dressed in all leather. What a weirdo. And it's so fascinating for me that you have, it's the exact same image, but if you just call it gay artist created it all of a sudden becomes controversial. It's so weird to me.
Yeah. I mean, let's just break it down for a second. Like pro wrestling and heavy metal, what are these at heart? They are men performing for other men to watch them, to communicate their prowess at a certain skill, whether it's bodybuilding and feats of athleticism or guitar mastery. I mean, it's largely men watching other men in various states of undress. In the case of heavy metal, it's men trying to impress other men with how fierce and ferocious they are and their virtuosity, how heavy they are. So it's all about impressing other men, like the whole thing. Now, that doesn't necessarily make it gay or sexual in any way, but that is the baseline. So I've always been surprised why more gay men aren't into both of those things. I can tell you I have an existential loneliness as a death metal fan, a gay death metal fan. Whenever I find one, I just like grab onto them with both hands and like try and geek out with them as much as possible, because I have been in the gay bar wearing a Slayer shirt and asked if that's serious, if I'm like wearing it ironically or whatever. So I do love kind of coming in and stomping on these sort of sacred heterosexual cows, out there. And G.I. Joe is one of them. And as you said, that cover, it outraged a bunch of those conservative fans.
Why?
I'm
looking at it right now.
Yeah, a lot of my gay fans were like, this isn't very gay at all. I mean, you just added chest hair to it. I will say, I'm sorry, I'm going to rat out Hasbro. They wanted me to change the butt on that one character of Ripper on the ground. They said it was protruding too much. It was too sexual. So they made me curve the back on it amongst a couple other little edits. And I was just like, okay, I mean, I just really want to do this. I'm so thankful. Aubrey Sitterson, shout out to Aubrey, a real successful writer he's had a bunch of Dark Horse books and successful Kickstarters releasing his work. I'm just thankful to be asked to do it. But yeah, I sort of didn't understand what the big deal was, because I thought I had threaded the needle pretty well.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Baroness, I mean, how many sexualized images of the Baroness are out there? I think the big criticism of the conservative guys was like, don't sexualize this kid's toy. Have you seen the Baroness in the movies? Have you seen some of those covers? One of the newer covers that springs to mind is of the Baroness completely naked, wrapped in a fur sort of rug in front of a fireplace. That's the cover,
Wow.
Whatever.
But once you start, and I grew up with, covers by I love these artists, but like Jim Lee or the iconic like X-Men, Mark Silvestri, very voluptuous. Like that's how I kind of learned to draw, is by like copying their version of female bodies. And I never thought twice about it. I just thought, they are beautiful women. They're supposed to be athletic. But then when you become an adult and you're like, you see how angry men, straight men get when you just slightly tweak something and show, Nightwing's ass on a cover, and they just like their head explodes. And you're like, for the last 80 years, it's been nonstop objectification of women in every single way. And it's like, just give us Nightwing's ass every once in a while. It's not that big of a deal. Like, don't read that comic, then go get an issue of whatever you want to go look at. But it's really funny. We've talked about it on the podcast a couple times of people that are like anti-Eternals movie, anti-She-Hulk, and all this like uproar. And it's like, everything that Marvel does not have to be geared towards your little society. It can't. She-Hulk can be for women. I don't think that it's just for women, because I really enjoyed it, but it doesn't have to be just for you. Like, chill out. Like, go watch Spider-Man again if you don't want to watch the Eternals. Go watch Thor. But I get really heated about it because I just think it's so dumb. It's so stupid. Like, there's so many characters, so many comics out there. There should be something for everyone. And so anyway, I'll just keep going on if I keep thinking about it. But to get ready for this interview, I wanted to come up with some good questions for you. So I threw on some Slayer. Was kind of like listening to that full blast. I might have conjured a demon or two on accident, but we'll see what happens. But how does music inspire you? We obviously know that heavy metal aspect of Wuvable Oaf, but do you, are you someone who puts on music while you're drawing, while you're writing? How has it impacted you as an artist and as a creator, and how has it seeped its way into your work?
Yeah, well, I should say in the onset, my parents refused to get cable when I was growing up, so we did not have MTV. I caught MTV at friends' houses and my cousin's house when we would go visit them. So I had to, and I was an early lover of music. I think the first cassette that I got was from my aunt, and it was Michael Jackson's Thriller. And I used to sit in a rocking chair and just, because we didn't have MTV, make up videos in my head. So from a very early age, I did my best thinking when I was listening to music. And I would say that's still very true today. I do my best writing when I'm listening to music. I almost kind of, I wouldn't say I get into a trance-like state, but certainly it's a mental lubricant for me to kind of move through ideas. As I said, I visualize things as I'm listening to the music. So it takes me into some really interesting places. I make different decisions than if I'm just kind of sitting and writing at a computer, and I'll jot things down. So that's very much a part of my writing process. Is just my husband has seen me do this before. I just sit in the dark with headphones on and kind of rock back and forth, and occasionally jot things down. And yeah, that's definitely, from a very early age, been a part of my visualization process. Heavy metal in particular, especially, I wanted that to be a part of the Oath comic right away. I wanted there to be these battling bands in the comic. Much like from my youth, enjoying Gem and the Holograms and the Misfits, I wanted to have two battling bands and have that as a reference point in the comic as well. Big fan of the Gorillas. I mean, there are a bunch of other Metalocalypse later, obviously, was a big inspiration. So wanting to have that in the comic, I definitely did some research and reconnected with my inner metalhead, because I like all kinds of music, definitely, but I've had that thread running through. It's been interesting. I'm catching up on Stranger Things to see the character of Eddie and a pop cultural sort of manifestation for the first time, at least in a mainstream way that I can think of for a little while, having like a metal character in there. So, definitely, he doesn't quite stand up to my smell test. And I should say I think 4 or 5 episodes into the latest season. My baseline is John Bender from Breakfast Club. He's the realist. He's a real one. And Eddie, I'm still kind of forming an opinion about, but I definitely watching the new season of Stranger Things. That I was a bit younger, but I kind of started then too with Metallica and
Nice.
Who else? Def Leppard, Hysteria was my big Def Leppard record. So it's kind of come in and out of my life. But it's probably been like 7 years ago, I've started to work for Decibel magazine, one of the better I would say, best heavy metal magazines that's published in the United States, covering all kinds of extreme music. So I had to immediately kind of catch up to do that job. So my consumption of that music definitely increased, and that filtered its way into the comic as I realized that there was another audience out there that I might be able to reach. As we had sort of mentioned before, I did a comic where my characters meet Kerry King, and try and give him a demo tape. And I've heard that he's been given that comic. I've heard
nice.
Nothing more than that. I mean, if you read the comic, they are being real sketch and creeper around Kerry King by the end of it. So, but once I started putting that in there, I definitely got people that would come to my booth and be like, I hear there's a Kerry King comic here. Where is that? So I definitely wanted it to be a flavor or a palette that I painted with, because there is a band in the comic, as I said. Oaf's main love interest, at the heart of it, it's a romantic comedy, and the Oaf kind of takes some interest in the lead singer of this band, Ejaculoid, and it's a disco grindcore band. So there's a lot of in jokes about metal in there that metal guys can kind of gravitate towards and understand and appreciate. But I still listen to it to this day. And as you were saying, working with the magazine for years with the Decibel, I've slowly started to be followed by some of these death metal bands, which I'm not musically inclined at all. So when one of them follows me, I'm just like, oh my God, it's like a dream that I get to participate in this community. And my style doesn't really lend itself to a lot of the t-shirts and album covers and stuff like that. I'm very realistic about that. But I have started to get asked to do shirts and things like that. In particular, This one band, Casket Slime, I just did a design for. So that's like a dream come true for me. I love that band. They're sort of a thrash death band. Yeah. So, it's had an interesting feedback loop. I've portrayed it in the comics, and now I'm becoming a participant myself with it. So I still listen to it. I mean, my favorite bands right now are Sanguisuga Bog, Vomit Forth. I could go down the line. Maggot Stomp, for anybody that's interested, is like a great label. I recently got into deathcore, which is hated by death metal fans of our generation. They're sort of like the younger millennial and Zoomer bands, like that's their audience, like deathcore. But I got into Fit for an Autopsy, which to me is the logical next step in my own goth journey. I was super into Depeche Mode and Susie and the Banshees and The Cure. Fit for an Autopsy is just a harder version of those goth bands, and Sisters of Mercy. I can't not mention Sisters of Mercy. So,
I just learned what deathcore was a couple of weeks ago when we interviewed a journalist from Australia who covers deathcore music. So that's really cool.
Yeah, one of the things that was really striking about talking with our previous guest is how, quote, normal and well-mannered and almost soft-spoken he was. I shouldn't say soft-spoken, but just not the hardcore, like you almost expect to talk to someone and be like, whoa, like, hey, how's it going? and we kind of joked about that. And it's funny how, people get labeled and there's these assumptions about that. You mentioned going into a gay bar with the Slayer. Have you had sort of any other requests from, your gay fanhood of like, can you slip in some like more traditional, nods to gay icons, or, have you been tempted to like maybe add anything that maybe people would be surprised that you're also a fan of?
No, I mean, I think really early on in the Oaf series, there's a short story called Ultimate Sacrifice, in which Eiffel is trying to, I think, conjure the favor of the Dark Lord or something like that. And he does some chanting, and within that is the beginning of Bad Romance, Lady Gaga's Bad Romance. I'm not going to try and say it here. It's been years since I heard that song. I'm a Lady Gaga fan, absolutely. I think periodically people so know me, my circle of friends so know me for liking that type of music, that when I say, oh yeah, I saw Tori Amos in the Under the Pink tour, when I was in college, like I didn't spring from the womb like this. Okay. Like I had a journey. I can't live in that sort of that type of musical world forever. I need some release. I'm a big electronic music fan. I loved the Chemical Brothers' last record was sort of my lifeline during the pandemic. The Strokes' last record is amazing. That song "At the Door," that was my pandemic song. It still gets a little tear, coming out of my eye. It's an incredible animated video, very heavy metal magazine looking video. So I'm trying to think if there are any recent references. I've been so steeped in working on the follow-up to the Oaf book, which is essentially a prequel. I know, prequel, right? Yeah, everybody's doing a prequel. But I just saw someone do a review of the House of the Dragon, and they were sort of saying, I think it's time to redeem the prequel. Like Better Call Saul, people kind of think that's a better series than Breaking Bad, and House of the Dragon looks like it's going to be a great series too. So I decided to kind of go back to the Oaf's sort of year one as Goat Blood, as the sort of heavy metal themed wrestling character that you see little glimpses of in the comic, but I've really sort of focused on in the last 5 years a little bit more. And then we also pick up with Eiffel, who is a senior in high school and is being bullied, and goes home to watch what else but wrestling and kind of see his future husband. If you've read the Oath book, or I won't say husband, they're not married yet, they're still dating, but his future boyfriend. So a lot of my music references from back then are, I wanted to make sure that they were period. It's like the mid to late 90s. So I'm kind of not so many contemporary music references in that, but certainly he goes home from school skateboarding and he's listening to Midlife Crisis by Faith No More. And he's waving hi to all the dads in his neighborhood because he knows them all. He's on a name basis with all of them. So I'm just trying to think some of the other pop cultural references. I'm also kind of working on an unrelated book right now, a sci-fi horror pitch that kind of uses it kind of uses Earth, which is long extinct, but has put out Earth's sort of radio waves, electronic waves, whatever, have polluted the farthest reaches of the universe. So it is fetishized. Earth culture is fetishized. So there's a lot of kind of pop culture references. Klaus Nomi might be surprising. That I'm a huge fan of his. The sort of very dearly departed, one of the first, I would say, victims of the AIDS in the early 80s. But was an iconic artist. So those kind of pop culture references that aren't metal, I try and work into things too every once in a while.
Nice. So I heard that you might be introducing a Latina wrestler into the universe there. And can we, maybe hear some more about that character?
Absolutely. She has been. She was Disastra. Is that particular character. And she was introduced in a short run of Vice comics that I did back when Vice had a sort of, I would say daily, but once a week, artists would upload their comics. I was asked I did a run of, I think, 12, and then I did a short run of 6 where Disastra replaced Goat Blood as the main character, because I wanted to pivot and try and show a little bit of that character's experience, what it's like to be a female wrestler, the costume, sort of branding that went on with Goat Blood in the first round of comics. She also goes through that too. She is a part of a coven of wrestlers, mostly female, but some of them are non-binary, some of them are genderqueer, some of them are trans. Nice. And they all embody a different genre of metal. So she is Sister Death. Yeah. That's cool. And she's a Latina wrestler. That run I think was collected in Fantagraphics, collected it in something. No, definitely. I wanted to take sort of the relatively static and brief look that you got at the wrestling world in the Oaf comic and expand that, have more fun with it, comment on a lot of the tropes of wrestling. But also, as I said, it's meant to be a more sort of progressive wrestling league that's based in Oakland. So much like what's going on with wrestling today, I kind of wanted to mirror that. You're seeing stories and you're seeing gimmicks and character types that you up until very recently haven't been able to see in professional wrestling. And I think that's just that enriches storytelling. Like I don't want to see the same like boring to muscle heads and especially white muscle heads like pound each other into the ground. It's boring. It's one of the reasons why I've lapsed from WWE right now. I mean, for obviously their politics are garbage. But it's just the same, more of the same. They're not interested in kind of telling new, exciting stories. So I'm excited by Pero, the death match, Daddy Bear and Effie, and I'm trying to think of who else. I mean, it's a great time to be an indie wrestling fan for sure. And I wanted to make sure that I explored that in the comic too.
Absolutely. You mentioned you're a big fan of horror movies. What are some of the horror movies that like your, top 5, some of the top movies that you just are classics?
Yeah. Okay. Again, another unpopular opinion. I just got into a little tiff with somebody over Neon Demon, which has a terrible Amazon Prime review. And I understand why. And a lot of the reviews are from women that did not like the fact that it was a man kind of essentially writing his version of LA modeling, sort of scene. And I get that. I think there's more going on in the movie than a lot of people are willing to kind of look below the surface of it. I think it's about witches. I think that the central 3 characters are a coven. And I think the main character, have either of you seen it?
I have not seen it yet.
Yeah, no. The main character is this seemingly very innocent young girl who moves to LA with dreams of becoming a model. There is much more going on with her if you sort of read between the lines, and you, especially midway through the movie, she kind of undergoes this transformation. And I think there's a lot of it's witchcraft, for sure. And there's some necromancy towards the end.
Nice.
Spoiler, it gets real. When I say I like horror movies, it's because I like to watch something horrible. Now, obviously, there are boundaries, and I don't want to see, any kind of endangered groups, vulnerable groups exploited in these, and that's across the board. But I want to see, when I want to watch a horror movie, I want to watch something that challenges my boundaries and makes me feel the horror of that situation. Neon Demon will deliver that for you by the end of it for sure. So I'm a huge fan of that. I love Mandy, that Nicolas Cage movie. I forget, Panos Cosmatos is the director. He only did one movie before that called Beyond the Black Rainbow, which is great, but not as fully realized, I think, as Mandy is. It's a great Nicolas Cage performance. People get down on how derivative some of the things are. The villains in it are very much the Cenobites from the Hellraiser series. But it's a movie like Neon Demon where you can just like immerse yourself in it and just be carried along by the waves of imagery. They're very beautiful films, and you get some of that catharsis in it, which is another reason why I watch horror movies. It's a revenge movie. So yeah, I love Mandy. Trying to not go too long-winded with this. I liked Green Room. That came out several years ago. That's about a punk band that finds themselves
the Nazis,
in the middle of the woods. Yeah, in Oregon, playing for a bunch of Nazis, and they see something that they should not see, and they have to fight their way out of the Green Room. And Patrick Stewart is in it in a very non-Patrick Stewart role. Don't get attached to any of the characters. I like movies that are like, screw your feelings. Here's an actress that you love. We're going to do something terrible to her and you're going to be upset. I like those kind of horror movies for sure.
Yeah, same. I think anything that kind of knocks you off your feet and does the unexpected, I really like. I become a fan of, definitely. So I wanted to do a little bit of give you a quick list of like one or the other and tell me which one you prefer. If you want to, tell us why, by all means, definitely. So to get, this one's a little bit timely because there was a new Predator. So Predator or Alien?
Oh, Aliens. Sorry. Someone asked me recently what my favorite movie is, and I struggled mightily with that answer. It's Aliens. It's got a little bit of everything in it. It's got a performance of a career from Sigourney Weaver. It's got sexy Marines in it. Sorry. And it, it's got one of the most iconic lines in film history is for my money. So yeah, definitely Aliens. I like the first Predator. That's definitely one of my three favorite Schwarzenegger movies.
Yeah.
Running Man, Predator, and oh gosh, what's the third one? Oh, Total Recall.
I thought you were gonna say Kindergarten Cop. Damn it!
All the comedies are a total wash. Sorry, Arnie.
I actually, in regarding Sigourney Weaver and Alien, I just read this article, and she might have something in common with Wuvable Oaf. Apparently, her panties, she refused to pull them up. And they were so low that her hair was sticking out, and they had to pay someone to digitally, airbrush. I don't know if it was digital back then, but like to remove her pubic hair. And the director was like, yeah, I spent like $7,000 because she refused to pull up her panties. And I thought, I just thought that's a badass Sigourney Weaver story. Like, I love her, but like the fact that like she was relatively unknown actress at the time, that was like her star making vehicle. And she was like, no, you're going to see my bush, like whatever. I'm a woman. I have hair, like deal with it. So yeah, really cool.
Fantastic.
So this one is for comic book geeks, and I think you might know the little bit of controversy, but Doom Patrol or X-Men?
Oh man, that is a real tough one because Doom Patrol is really close to my heart, but I got to go with X-Men because when I started collecting, like as a serious collector, comics, as serious as a 13-year-old can be, bagging and boarding essentially. My first issue of the X-Men was 248. It was the first Jim Lee issue. So, I am ride or die for X-Men. The comics that I have refused to get rid of over the many moves that I have made are my X-Men collection. I won't get rid of those. So yeah, definitely them. But I mean, I love Doom Patrol. I love Grant Morrison. When I started to trend out of mainstream comics as a older teenager, that Doom Patrol run, I think with Richard Case was the artist on it. It really spoke to me. I got into the TV series a little bit. I have to say I cried my eyes out when I saw Danny the Street was in it, and that they were using their them pronouns in episode to describe that. Flex Mentallo is my favorite DC character, so it's a tough choice, but I gotta go with the X-Men.
Yeah, and did you do a variant cover, or was it just like a pinup of Flex? I feel like
I just did a pinup. Yeah, I was sort of. There was some interest in me doing one at the time when Gerard Way had taken over, but never came to fruition. So I did that just so I could draw him because I would have absolutely put Flex Metallo on that cover.
Nice. All right, so here we're going into like a little bit of music. So Ozzy or Rob Halford?
Oh man, it's got to be Rob. I mean, I will not front. While I enjoy Judas Priest, they are not. I have a couple of their records. They are not an albums band for me. I'm more like singles. And of course, I love Ozzy. I watch the Osbournes like everybody else. I like those first couple Sabbath albums. So, but it's got to be Rob just because he is who he is. I mean, I follow him on Instagram. He's still out there doing it, and I worship that. He imprinted on all of these straight metal bands, all these death metal bands and black metal bands that are dressing the way that they do. They're dressing that way because of a gay man who went to, I think, I forget what the name of that shop was in Britain, in the UK, fetish leather shop. And he just bought the store and started wearing it on stage. So it's got to be Rob.
Now, you mentioned that you went to school here in San Diego. Did you go to school when Rob was living here in San Diego?
I have a Rob Halford story. So I was in Hillcrest, probably the first year that I was there, so 1998. Before, I think he trafficked kind of in between there and Arizona. Mm-hmm. I think he could be found in Phoenix. But I was at I think it was a CVS, whatever the drugstore is in Hillcrest, across from the brass rail. I think it's just the rail now.
Yeah.
I was in there. I was waiting in line, to get water or something like that. And there was Rob Halford, in line too. So yeah, I did cross over. I didn't say anything. I was terrified, and also probably a little drunk, and just. That was not my agenda. I did not expect to see Rob Halford that evening, but I certainly knew he was. And he had only just come out, I think, at that point too, maybe 1 or 2 years after he had come out. So he was very unabashedly out on the town that night.
Yeah, I when you mentioned the story of Oaf, like chasing after, trying to hand the demo, I saw Rob in Hillcrest at the coffee shop next to Urban Moe's, just having a little coffee. You have this image of him as like Judas Priest and, the iconic singer. And he's just, nice guy, of a certain age, drinking his coffee. And I, got all quiet and just like watched him for, a few minutes before like I looked like a total weirdo. But I think that's what I love about your comic is it is so relatable. I mean, I remember being in like 8th grade and hearing where like the quote after party was like after a concert and trying to go, even though we were like kids and there was no way we were going to get in, but still like trying to get in and, try to see the artists and get to hang around them. So I love that you add that into your comic because it's real. It's, especially for music fans, like they can relate to that, of that desperation and of that, like you see your hero right there and it, love that part. So we talked about G.I. Joe. So G.I. Joe versus another classic for our generation, Masters of the Universe.
Oh, it's G.I. Joe. Yeah, sorry. I mean, again, this is a tough one because I look at the way that I draw and very recently came to discover that the sort of simple, blocky Masters of the Universe, like that body type, that because those figures were largely, there were some custom parts, but the arms and legs they just swapped out. But that kind of blocky, sort of simplified musculature, I think, really imprinted on my drawing style because. I had wanted to be a comic book artist when I was a teenager, but I just could not draw that way. And I think it's because Masters of the Universe sort of like stitched its way into my brain, that sort of voluminous way of drawing bodies. But G.I. Joe, again, I think there's just something about a man in uniform. I love the diversity of the outfits, and especially when they started to get a little bit away from the straight military kind of looks, just greens. My favorite character is Bazooka. I dress up as Bazooka. That's my cosplay. And he's just a dude in like a Patriots jersey, essentially. I think he's based on a real character. And he's got the mustache. And he was a great character on the cartoon. I definitely enjoyed the cartoon. It's better than I think a lot of people remember. So if you haven't watched it recently, watch it, especially those 5-part episodes where there was an arc. They kind of tell the same story 3 times in a row. And in fact, a friend of mine and I were talking about them. And at a certain point, we got completely tripped up trying to sort out who was what and the MacGuffin that they all had to get. But no, definitely there's so many more characters. And I'm not a particularly a military guy. I always say it's not really about the military. If people want to sort of say that it's like a warmongering and they were trying to program us in the 80s to be into the military, I am the furthest. I love that stuff. I never wanted to join the military. I was terrified of the draft being reinstituted, in the late 80s, early 90s, when we were getting involved in conflict. So I look at it as science fiction. It's largely science fiction.
Yeah, I same. I mean, I am not a big military gung-ho like MAGA person, but I had every G.I. Joe they released, every vehicle. It's kind of morbid, but after every battle that I would have, I had the case where you would put them in their single slots. And now that I think of it, I'm like, that's really creepy that you have this like case of like coffin like carrying case for each of your soldiers. But for me, it was like easy, carry, put it away or whatever. But I love G.I. Joe. I still I was tempted to start collecting the new classified G.I. Joe action figures, but I have limited space in my geek room, so it's like choices, like what are you going to start collecting and what do you have to say, what, I can't start with that because I'll be, have stuff out in the street. So
I hear you. I mean, I resisted the classified series too, and instead I started getting the original vintage 3.5-inch ones because I just wanted the ones that I had when I was a kid. I wanted a bazooka. I wanted a flint. Truthfully, now they are about twice as expensive as one of those classified series. But they look so good. I mean, they look great, and they're doing a great job of kind of remaining faithful to the original designs and the faces. I will always prefer the original head sculpts, even though they're sort of really simplified. They had a lot of character. They were often based on real people. I don't know if that's the case with these new ones, but I hear you. I mean, where does it stop with the 6 and 7 inch figure lines? Like,
I think that's like the theme for nerds of our age and our, there's so much stuff that's being thrown back like to the 90s, all the toys, all the comic, like all of our pop culture from when we were kids is all coming back. And it's like, they know where the money is. They know that we've reached success and that we can afford to like throw down a couple, 20s to buy a couple G.I. Joe figures. So when it comes to comics, me and Danny are sort of contrast. He likes sort of like that gritty realism of like Daredevil, the anti-hero. I sort of like the superhero, like fantasy, like they're gods. My thing is like, why punch someone when you could use your telekinesis power to hit them? Where do you fall in that camp? Like, do you have a preference? Do you like that superhero, Superman, godlike creature or person? Or do you like that gritty Batman, real man kind of a aesthetic?
Until you said Batman under the gritty, I was going to say, well, we're talking about Marvel and DC, right? I mean, it's sort of classically, but it has bled together a lot, in the last couple of decades, I would say. I would say I'm more of the gritty, realistic. I know that DC has done a great job, breaking down those godlike characters, or at least presenting them with problems that are, big enough for them to kind of handle. But if we could, go back a little bit to the 80s and 90s, well, let's just say 80s X-Men. You can't talk about the Hickman run because they were on a completely different level and almost godlike during that. But I think I liked how the X-Men could be hurt. And I especially love the Australian run because that is, I think, the grittiest that the X-Men got before the gloss of the 90s and the gold team and the blue team kind of came out. They were that, I always call them the punk rock X-Men. Xavier was gone. Good riddance. Hate Xavier. Shoot him into space. I never want to see him again. And you had this grittier team that half of them were they were injured. They were coming off of being massacred and all went to kind of go and heal. So that was, I think, the closest. I think what happened during that era, and I think we're talking mid to late 80s, was the X-Men had to keep up with the Punisher and Daredevil and Dark Knight. So they started killing people and they started fighting people who were killing people and massacring people. So I liked that grittier team. They were all hot to trot. There were little like love triangles within it because daddy was gone, telekinetic or telepathic father figure was gone, and they were just kind of out in the outback, like kind of checking each other out. So definitely more on the gritty side. I mean, as I said, I it's ancient now at this point, but I did like the Grant Morrison Justice League run where it felt like they were gods and they were presented the anti-gods, people that could take them down. I enjoyed those stories. I've kind of stepped away from a little bit, so I'm not sort of sure what's being done with them these days, but definitely love a more vulnerable and flawed type of hero.
Yeah, I while you were saying about the Mark Silvestri run, it made me laugh because I think of how people say like the woke comics are now. And, I remember a particular issue that they had where I think Psylocke, Dazzler, and maybe Rogue go shopping and they have like a fashion montage. And I'm like, really, like how like, I mean, it's not gay, but it definitely is like, it's not like this, Make America good again, like great again. Like they were throwing some bones to the little gay X-Men fans, drawing Dazzler in a cute little like leopard mini skirt. And it just made me laugh because it's like when you really look at things, like we've always been there, and they have known that we've been there as fans of comic books and music and all of those things. And it's not anything new. That it's like
I can't not mention too the entire Inferno storyline where everybody's costumes are being ripped off, and you have it's burned into my memory. Havoc has just like this little strip of fabric, and then his like tights are ripped to the thigh, and it's like midriff bearing, and it's like, what are we doing here, Mark Silvestri? Like, this is, definitely, yeah. And
definitely has like a dom sub relationship with the Goblin Queen, right? It's like very submissive, and it was definitely. I mean, was it like my introduction to the fetish world? Like now that I think about it, like looking at that imagery, it's really funny. But I do want to give you some opportunity to talk about upcoming projects where people can see you. Are you going to any conventions soon? What's going on?
Yeah, at the time of this recording, I'm getting ready for the Small Press Expo. That is in Bethesda, Maryland. It's very close to DC. It's one of the few East Coast shows that I do. Being someone on the West Coast, I do shows up and down. In fact, kind of getting back into doing in-person events. That started in March, and I think I must have done 6 or 7 shows since then. I'll be flying out there. I believe Small Press Expo is the 17th and 18th of September. It's at, I believe it's a Marriott in Bethesda. Love that show. I've been nominated for a couple awards, only won one, but the 2 times I've been nominated were for the Ignatz Award that is given out at the Small Press Expo. Oh, nice. I believe it's the biggest indie show that happens in the United States anyway. I think nice. TCAF, the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, is the biggest one in sort of this particular continent. But yeah, I'll be doing that. On September 24th is Permanent Damage, which is a really fun show that Keenan Marshall Keller and Tom Neely, who have done the Humans for Image, they've been doing these I think every 6 months, once in the summer and I think once in the fall. They'll be hosting Permanent Damage SF at the Silver Sprocket comic shop, a renowned publisher and retailer here in San Francisco. Oh, cool. I forget who's in that, so I don't want to say just in case I fudge that, but I'll be there for that too. I'm kind of in, as far as new projects go, I'm kind of in generation mode. I'm, coming out of the pandemic, I was not affected in the way that a lot of creative people were, who just took the opportunity and kind of ran with it. I think of Simon Hanselman, who, put out some of his best work and award-winning work during the pandemic. I kind of contracted and went into survival mode and just kind of lost my creative spark for a time. And I've been kind of trying to get that back. I've written a bunch of scripts, so I certainly have the follow-up to the Oaf book, that is in the works. I've released a couple chapters of that as individual issues that I have on my website, and just been really excited about kind of maybe doing something outside of Oaf, not like completely outside. But as I said, being a huge horror fan and a sci-fi fan, I started to kind of, a publisher sort of asked me like, what else you got? And I thought, I don't know, what else do I got? And I ended up sort of putting together a 6-issue miniseries. I don't want to sort of say too much about it because it may never get off the ground, but right. I spent a lot of time kind of figuring that out. And it's kind of my response to the pandemic, having just sort of mentioned that, and just feeling really isolated. As I said, it's got a lot of the kind of pop culture references that you'll find in the Oaf, because I found a clever writing device. Earth has polluted the entire universe, so there's the farthest reaches of the galaxy. There's a little glimpse into what I'm doing. There is a monastery planet whose religion is based on pro wrestling and death metal. So it's for all the misfits. It's for people like me.
Nice.
That's where they go to sort of find religion, and it's all about proving how badass you are. So there's a whole issue where the main character goes in and says, "This is the place for me. This is where I belong." That's. It's, as I said, I every once in a while release a T-shirt or a print or something like that. I've been a little quiet because I'm trying to generate new material.
Nice.
I have a question real quick about your creation process as a writer and the artist for Wuvable Oaf and for possibly, hopefully, a new sci-fi one. What comes first in your mind, the story or the artwork?
Oh, definitely lately it's been the story. So that is the complete opposite of the Oaf. He started out as a paper doll design for an art show, a paper doll art show in Arizona. I just kind of came up with the character and people were like, what is this? You know, who is this guy? So I built a story around him. Cool. But lately, being a professor, I teach at California College of the Arts in the Comics MFA program, which is actually now has a BFA program starting this fall.
Oh, wow.
And then I also teach in the illustration program. Being a mentor to the Comics MFA grads, we start with writing. And I have found that has become more of my process.
Okay, that's cool.
And free writing especially, my work is becoming a little bit more autobiographical. I'm really boring. I could never do memoir. I'm not that interesting, but I can take the seeds of my experience and sort of turn the volume up on those and kind of craft something. So nice. I've been doing a lot of that kind of free writing and kind of going through being a middle-aged man, going through my youth and sort of seeing how I'm becoming my parents, and how did I get here? And just kind of trying to sort of reconnect with that younger version of myself, and perhaps rewrite a little bit of my history. Things that I in this latest chapter that I sort of wrote, Eiffel gets his first boyfriend, and he's. Have you either of you ever seen Night of the Demon or Night of the Demons? It's in the late 80s.
Late 80s. Yeah, I think I've seen it.
There's a character called Stooge in that. Yeah. Stooge, a less misogynist, horrible version of that character, becomes Eiffel's first boyfriend. So that's been really fun for me to sort of write that. And I didn't have that experience when I was young. So definitely there's a little bit, people will say that, most comics are male power fantasy. And that's kind of my version of it. I want to rewrite my history a little bit. That's the fantasy element. So yeah, definitely writing first. If anything, the drawing has been a little bit of a struggle, especially with this science fiction comic that I'm trying to do. I sort of struck lightning a little bit with the original Oaf character design, and to try and follow that up, I've really sort of struggled in terms of trying to design. So, I've just been letting all of this stuff seep into my eyeballs. And at a certain point, it comes through my hand. So
nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So I wanted to direct everyone to your website, which is Wuvable Oaf, to spell it for everyone that maybe doesn't know how to spell it, WUVABLEOAF.com. Not only can you go there and buy collections, I think there's 2 volumes now, right? Of
you can't get that on my website. And disclaimer, that website's really ancient.
Really?
So try and view that on a computer. But otherwise, you can get those 2 Oaf volumes pretty much anywhere.
Okay, nice.
Directly from Fantagraphics. You can get them from the Evil Empire of Amazon if you want to, but those are available all over the place. Yeah.
And I'll make links in our YouTube and whatnot for where people can go purchase those. And I'll include myself because I want to get at them now. So.
Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciate about you, Ed, is that you have the coolest merch, Oaf related products like stickers, your T-shirts. I think I have 3 of your shirts. Just a ton of cool stuff. So collectors, I think, would appreciate that because I love to collect everything. I've already mentioned that, but got a lot of Oaf stuff. So I definitely recommend people that are fans of, illustration. I think it's such a strong graphic that you have in the Oaf character. Slap it on your water. What are those called? Hydro flask. That's what I've done. So I think it's cool. So anyway, thank you once again for coming and talking to us. I definitely have appreciated your conversation. And once again, everyone check out your work. Go buy, support you as an artist. Once again, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you both. It's been a real pleasure.
Yes, thanks.